Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. Sunday evening, September 7th, 2025, Augusta, Georgia. A Best Buy parking lot on Walton Way Extension. Bright lights, cameras, families moving in and out. It's a place people choose because it feels controlled. 911. What is your emergency? A child is crying. Two car doors hang open under a blue storefront glow. By 6:47 p.m., 2 lives are gone. In the very parking lot families choose because it's supposed to be safe. Here is what is fixed. Around 6:12 p.m., multiple 911 calls report gunfire. First responding officers find 2 adults down between parked vehicles. The child, about 5, appears uninjured and is moved out of line of sight. EMS works quickly. By 6:47 p.m., both adults are pronounced dead at the scene. Yellow tape goes up. Lanes are closed. Every car locked inside the perimeter is logged as potential evidence. We keep one scene for this entire case. This lot, no second location, no side house, no alternate timeline. Officers establish a clean evidence bubble. Numbered placards mark shell casings. Vehicle positions are sketched and photographed from front, rear, and overhead angles. The storefront's camera pods and lot light pole housings are identified for footage requests. Adjacent businesses are noted for overlapping views of arrivals, door openings, and any movement in the minutes before and after the shots. Witnesses are separated and asked for contact details, vantage points, and whether they saw an approach, an argument, or only the aftermath. Victim identification proceeds in parallel with next of kin notifications and a careful review of items at scene. Wallets, phones, keys, and any visible documents are photographed in place before collection. Officers log weather, ground conditions, ambient light, and the exact time each step occurs. Open-air gunfire complicates gunshot residue, so the geometry matters. Where the casings fell, where the bodies are positioned, how close the doors are to hinge stops, and whether duck or swing suggests entry, exit, or a defensive shield in those seconds. None of that is speculation. It's standard documentation. The goal is simple. Fix the map before memory drifts. You will hear one claim later in this story: fear. That claim is common after sudden violence. The test is always the same: match words to minutes and minutes to movement. In cases like this, the strongest witnesses are often silent. Timestamps, trajectory, and camera coverage. The human witnesses still matter, but the timeline never blinks. 2 names now enter this record with care and respect: Melissa Cooey Domingo, 41, and her mother Elizabeth Cooey Domingo, 74. They were here for a custody handoff that should have taken minutes. The scene tells us it didn't. For the child who stood inside this moment, the state's Child Services Unit is notified to ensure immediate safety and continuity of care while investigators work. We will not guess. We will not dramatize. We will build this case the way investigators do. One surface, one timestamp, one camera angle at a time. If you've ever believed a public lot guarantees safety, this file asks you to look again, through the lens of evidence. The facts of presence are direct. Melissa Cooey Domingo, 41, and her mother Elizabeth Cooey Domingo, 74, arrived at the Best Buy lot on Walton Way Extension for a custody handoff that was expected to last minutes. Public lots are a common choice for exchanges because they provide lighting, cameras, foot traffic, and predictable sightlines. On this Sunday evening, the environment matched that checklist. Bright facade lighting, marked aisles, and multiple entry points with vehicles moving at low speed. The exchange window was prearranged. Investigators later documented the timing from device records and routine messages that framed the handoff as standard and brief. Victimology starts with pattern, not speculation. Melissa's routine around exchanges included driving to well-lit retail areas and having a support person visible in the vicinity. On this date, Elizabeth filled that role. The intent is practical: confirm the drop-off, reduce the risk of confrontation, and leave. Investigators handling family violence cases see this configuration often. One custodial parent, one trusted adult, clear space, no enclosed rooms. When officers reviewed the lot after the scene was secured, they noted where the victim's vehicle had been positioned relative to storefront cameras and to the cart corrals that can capture useful passerby angles. They traced a direct route from the main access lane to the parking slot and a short walking path a child could take from a back seat to the neutral transfer point. The child's presence changes how exchanges unfold. Officers documented the child's seat location, door status, and the immediate protective steps taken by first responders. This is not about dramatizing harm, it is about sequence. With a young child present, parents typically minimize talk, avoid lateral movement, and aim for a quick handoff. That is the expectation a lot like this is supposed to support. In Augusta, as in many American cities, the idea is simple. Choose a place where visibility discourages escalation. The outcome here shows the limits of that assumption, but the baseline logic remains part of the file. Establishing prior routine helps explain decisions made on the day. Investigators will look for repeating details in texts and calendars, weekday versus weekend exchanges, hour of day, who usually accompanies Melissa, where vehicles normally stop. They will map whether the same section of the lot was used in prior weeks and whether any party typically parked nose out for a faster departure. None of this assigns motive. It establishes expectation. If the same setup appears week after week, then any sharp departure on this date matters. A different stall, an unusual delay, or a changed approach vector could indicate that external pressure or a new constraint was at work. Elizabeth's role is not abstract. A second adult at a custody handoff serves two functions: practical support for a parent moving a child and passive documentation of the exchange if anything deviates. In practical terms, that can mean standing near the rear passenger door when a child's buckle is released, holding a backpack, confirming time, and keeping the handoff in open view. Investigators will chart Elizabeth's likely standing position from door swing, footprint transfer, and camera sightlines. That mapping will later be compared to witness statements describing who stood where and for how long in the minute before the shots. Because this is an open-air scene, the most reliable early indicators of how the victims moved are not stains or complex residue patterns, but geometry. Investigators recorded distances from each victim to the nearest tire line, the angle of any open door to its hinge stop, and whether the victim's positions are consistent with shielding a child or maintaining a narrow transfer zone. They also checked whether any personal effects, phone, keys, a small bag, were staged for a quick exit. These are ordinary details in ordinary exchanges. Their presence or absence helps define whether events built gradually into conflict or shifted in a single abrupt step. The human picture matters, but the tone of this work stays clinical for a reason. The case needs stable anchors: who they were, why they were here, and how the routine should have looked if nothing interfered. From there, the departures stand out. If you have ever helped with a custody exchange, you know the private math. Make it predictable, keep it brief, let the child see familiar adults behaving predictably. In towns like Augusta, that routine is part of the social fabric. When it fails, the tear is visible. For the record, Melissa and Elizabeth followed the public safety playbook available to them: open space, lighting, cameras, another adult present, a set window agreed in advance. That context does not resolve cause. It frames the baseline against which every second in the minutes that follow will be measured. In this series, we do not ask you to accept anyone's fear as a conclusion. We ask you to watch the map, the angles, and the logs, and to see whether the routine these two women built is consistent with what happened next. The goal here is reconstruction, not speculation. Investigators begin by fixing where each vehicle stopped, which doors opened, and what the cameras could see in the minutes before the gunfire. The Best Buy facade carries multiple camera pods aimed at the entrance lanes and the closest rows of parking. Several pole-mounted housings watch the outer aisles. Adjacent storefronts often record the same lanes from different angles. Technicians request synchronized exports and a simple grid overlay: row number, island brake, cart corral, light pole. That grid becomes the base layer for every movement that matters. From device pings and routine messages tied to the custody exchange, detectives bracket a short arrival window. They mark the victim's vehicle entering from the main access lane, signal on, speed low. The car pauses, straightens, and noses in along a row with clear sightlines to the store doors. A second adult, Elizabeth Cui Domingo, typically serves as visible support at exchanges. The grid shows a predictable walk path from the rear passenger side door to a neutral handoff point no more than a few steps from the vehicle. That path is short by design. It keeps the child within arm's reach and limits side-to-side exposure. A pre-incident map needs more than arrows. It needs physical anchors. Scene photos record how far the open doors reach toward their hinge stops, whether a seatbelt buckle lay extended, and if a small bag or personal effect was staged for transfer. Investigators measure the gap between the rear passenger door and the curb stop, the distance from the driver's door to the painted line, and the angle of both front wheels. Those small values narrow what could have happened in the final minute: who stood nearer the trunk line, who faced the aisle, and whether anyone shifted positions out of routine. Coverage limits are documented in the same unemotional way. One facade camera catches the lane, but not the full rear quarter of the victim's car. A pole camera sees the aisle but drops resolution beyond 2 stalls. That is normal for retail lots. When technicians synchronize the feeds, they rely on visual events the cameras share: headlights sweeping, a cart return shadow, a door opening at the same second, to align the footage. The result is a clean timeline measured in seconds, not estimates. In towns like Augusta, that level of precision is the difference between a story told and a story tested. Witness accounts are captured early and separated by vantage point. Some people saw a brief approach. Others heard the first shot but did not see who moved first. Officers record where each witness stood and what blocked their view: an SUV tailgate, a sedan roofline, a bright reflection from the storefront glass. Later, those statements are compared to the camera grid to check whether a claimed sightline even existed. This is standard, and it avoids memory contamination. The tone stays clinical because the work demands it. The child's position is fixed without dramatics. First responders note the car seat location, the door used, and how quickly the child was moved to safety once the scene was stabilized. That matters for sequence. Many custody exchanges end with a buckle click and a brief confirmation. If the normal sequence was underway, the map should show it: door open, adult stance near the rear quarter, minimal lateral movement. If something interrupted that routine, the timeline should show that too: an unexpected approach, a stall change, a reposition that breaks the pattern established in prior weeks. By the time the mapping pass is complete, the grid tells a straightforward story about placement and seconds. It does not judge motive. It does not assign blame. It fixes where people were and how the lot's architecture, curb stops, cart corrals, light poles, framed their choices. In many investigations, the most powerful note is the quiet one. The routine looks intact until the instant it doesn't. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Within minutes of the shots, a male caller reaches 911 and reports fear for his life, mentioning an injury. That statement is logged like any other piece of evidence: time received, content summarized, origin recorded. It will be tested against the same grid, the same seconds, the same physical anchors. In this format, claims do not carry the case. Maps do. A final note for viewers who track cases to learn something useful: public, well-lit spaces reduce risk. They don't erase it. If you rely on a retail lot for a handoff, document your plan and keep the path short, visible, and predictable. That is what this family did. The record shows it. The narrative introduced after the shots was simple. A male caller told 911 he feared for his life and reported an injury. Investigators logged the statement with a timestamp and placed it beside the grid built from synchronized cameras, photographs, and measurements taken in the Best Buy lot on Walton Way Extension. From that point on, the case progressed the way most credible use of force reviews do: by testing the claim against fixed points that do not move: casing placement, door angles, victim positions, and the elapsed seconds captured on video. Technicians began with the shell casings. In open air, casings are small, but reliable. Their pattern suggests where a shooter stood and how many steps, if any, were taken between shots. The spread also helps determine whether fire came from a relatively fixed stance or during movement. Scene photographs marked each casing with a numbered placard and recorded distance to the nearest tire line and painted stall mark. Those images were paired with the grid from Chapter 3 to see how the spread related to the vehicle doors and the short transfer path intended for the child. If a person were retreating while firing in genuine fear, investigators would expect some displacement in that pattern and a line that pulls away from the victims. If the casings clustered near one position or advanced toward the victim's last positions, that would point in another direction entirely. Trajectory came next. Without dramatics, it is one of the most decisive tests. Using measured heights of vehicle panels, door frames, and curb stops, investigators plotted bullet paths where recoverable impacts or perforations existed. Even when a projectile is not recovered on scene, impact geometry can show whether rounds traveled downward, roughly level, or upward, and whether a victim likely faced the shooter or was angled away. In public lots, angles are often clean because background surfaces, doors, quarter panels, window glass, preserve the line. Those angles were then compared to where witnesses reported seeing the first movement. If fear-driven retreat were the reality, the lines typically lean away from the victims and toward cover. Here, detectives reported that the developing physical record did not align with the caller's version. Distance indicators were handled with equal restraint. Open air and rapid medical response complicate gunshot residue, so investigators rely on a combination of clothing perforation, soot or stippling if present, and the absence of close-range hallmarks to bracket muzzle to target distance. That bracket is rough at the scene and later refined by the medical examiner. The preliminary question is straightforward. Does the evidence suggest contact, near contact, or intermediate range? In a claimed defensive posture, near-contact shots often occur if two people struggle over a weapon. Intermediate range may suggest some separation. Whatever the distances indicated, they had to match the map. The reportable finding again was consistent with the agency's public posture. The physical evidence and witness accounts did not support the fear narrative offered on the call. Door swing and stance evidence provided an additional check. Photographs captured how far each open door sat against its hinge stop, whether the rear passenger door, the typical exit point for a child in a safety seat, acted as a shield, and where the adult's feet likely were when the first shot rang out. Small details help here: the angle of a front wheel, a scuff near a curb stop, a bag positioned for a quick handoff. When mapped against seconds, those anchors can show whether the exchange had reached the ordinary moment of transfer or whether someone had already maneuvered to a position of advantage. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Witness vantage points were treated like instruments, not opinions. Each person's location was fixed on the grid. Each reported observation was tested against what their line of sight could realistically have captured given vehicle height and light reflection. Accounts describing a brief approach or no audible argument were weighed against the synchronized camera timeline. Investigators did not need audio to measure time. They needed the frame where a door edge changes position, the instant a headlight sweeps past a stall, the second a figure crosses between two fixed poles. When the seconds were counted, the chronology was solid enough to carry probable cause. The human dimension is not omitted, it is contained. A custody exchange with a child present is built for speed and visibility. People minimize talk, shorten the path, and get back behind the wheel. The evidence preserved at this location showed that routine was in place until the moment it wasn't. That alone does not prove intent, and it is not offered here as a legal conclusion. It establishes that the physical scene, the mapped seconds, and multiple vantage points pulled in the same direction, away from a defensive retreat and toward a sequence the agency believed met the standard for arrest. As the grid firmed up, detectives prepared the package that always follows this kind of finding: scene diagrams, casing maps, door angle photos, and a synchronized clip set showing before, during, and after in real time. That package is designed to survive scrutiny. It is built so each piece verifies the next: placard numbers tie to photos, photos tie to distances, distances tie to camera frames. In towns like Augusta, murders aren't just crimes. They tear at the fabric of a quiet community. The best response is a file that can carry its own weight without commentary. This section sets the legal and historical context that existed before September 7, 2025. It does not argue motive, it establishes what courts had already found and how those findings shape day-to-day safety planning. The record shows that on New Year's Eve 2021, Melissa Cui Domingo used force against her then-husband during a domestic incident. In the months and years that followed, attorneys litigated whether that use of force was criminal or defensive. Days before the Best Buy shooting, a Georgia judge issued a ruling granting immunity to Melissa for the 2021 incident on the ground of lawful self-defense, with the file referencing trauma consistent with PTSD battered person syndrome and a documented history of control and abuse dynamics. The legal effect of immunity is specific. It bars prosecution for that past event. It does not predict future behavior by anyone involved, and it does not alter police response to a new scene. But it does confirm that the court credited a sustained pattern when measuring the risk she had faced. A separate track concluded in November 2024. The divorce was finalized. Post-divorce, the family operated under a custody framework that, like most in Georgia, presumes regular exchanges, reliable timestamps, and a preference for highly visible public settings when trust is low. That is why a bright, busy lot remained part of the routine. Police who work family violence cases see this combination often. A past court finding that validates prior danger, a recent dissolution of the marriage, and a custody plan that tries to reduce friction by moving the handoff into the open. None of it guarantees safety. All of it explains why the exchange on September 7th looked ordinary until it did not. How does this matter to the forensic map you've already seen? The immunity order anchors why Melissa favored repeatable, brief, well-lit exchanges with another adult present. It is not character evidence, it is risk management. The same is true of the divorce date. Once the court split the household in late 2024, a pattern of short, documented transfers became the practical compromise. When investigators reviewed phone calendars and routine messages for the weeks leading into September, they were not hunting gossip. They were confirming that the Best Buy lot on Walton Way Extension fit a pattern already blessed, implicitly or explicitly, by the family court's need for predictable compliance. This is where restraint matters. It is easy to overread a prior ruling as prelude. That is not what the law says. Immunity for 2021 means only that the state could not prosecute Melissa for that prior event. It does not speak for what happened in 2025. What it does is explain the structure around the exchange. Visible place, short walk, second adult. When the lot evidence shows that structure remained intact up to the final seconds, it reinforces a narrow point. The victims were following the very guidance these cases generate. If you follow true crime to extract practical value, take this from the paper trail. Court orders and findings are inputs to safety planning, not shields. They help families pick the place, the timing, and the backup. Then reality still arrives on its own terms. The human stakes here are not abstract. A mother and a grandmother built routines around what the system told them would lower risk. The routine held until it didn't. Once the scene map and timeline were locked, the investigation moved from documentation to action. The individual who reported fear on the 911 call was medically evaluated for a minor injury, identified by investigators, and transported for booking. The paperwork reflected the core posture you've seen building since the lot was sealed. The physical record supported probable cause. On this case, that meant 2 counts of murder and 1 count of first-degree cruelty to children, all tied to the same event in the Best Buy parking lot on Walton Way Extension in Augusta, Georgia, on Sunday, September 7, 2025. The name now enters the record, Hajir Talibzadeh. In a process that is routine but consequential, deputies served the arrest warrants after confirming identity and completing medical clearance. The arrest affidavit summarized the findings rather than arguing them. Synchronized camera seconds, casing locations, door positions, and witness vantage points that, taken together, did not align with a defensive retreat. The same packet included stills pulled from the video timeline with embedded time codes, a diagram of stall numbers and pole positions, and close-range scene photographs showing where each placard sat when evidence was collected. Chain of custody logs traveled with the packet to preserve admissibility. Booking is not an endpoint, it is a handoff. At intake, officers documented injuries, logged property, and recorded biographical data. The listed charges informed the initial bond posture. In violent felony homicides, courts in Georgia typically default to strict conditions or no bond absent exceptional circumstances. That decision belongs to the judge at first appearance. The presumption of innocence remains intact, and the weight of the evidence, whatever it is, will be tested later through discovery and hearings. The role of law enforcement here is narrow. Present a file sturdy enough to withstand scrutiny without narration. Parallel to booking, case managers confirmed that the child present at the lot had already been routed through the Department of Family and Children's Services for immediate safety measures and continuity of care. Investigators coordinated with DFCS only to the extent necessary to document presence, timing, and contact pathways. The welfare track is deliberately walled off from the criminal file to avoid cross-contamination of statements and to minimize trauma. The discovery phase is where both sides work from the same clock. Prosecutors prepared a reciprocal disclosure schedule and an initial exhibit list. Synchronized clips, still frames with second markers, the casing map, measurements for door angles and curb stop distances, and the medical examiner's preliminary notations on range indicators, to be finalized after full autopsy reporting. Defense counsel would receive copies and, as is standard, could request raw exports from the cameras to verify time alignment or test alternate interpretations of motion. If there is a firearm, projectile, or fragment in evidence, those items proceed through the state lab on separate chains, with results distributed to both sides when available. There is a human reality at the booking stage that does not require conjecture. A defendant faces the weight of felony charges. A family prepares for a drawn-out pretrial calendar. A community that watched the tape go up around a familiar lot waits for hearings, not headlines. In towns like Augusta, murders aren't just crimes. They interrupt routines you thought were safe. The responsible answer is a case file that can carry itself, second by second, into court. After booking, the file shifted from fieldwork to courtroom readiness. Prosecutors opened discovery and issued a preliminary exhibit list built to stand on its own. Synchronized video segments with embedded second marks, still frames that capture door movement and body placement, the casing map with stall references, and measurement sheets for door angles and curb stop distances. Each item is tied by number to a chain of custody entry so any juror or defense expert can trace where it came from and who touched it next. The philosophy is simple. If a piece of evidence can't survive a direct challenge, it doesn't belong in the first row. The video is prepared first because it carries the timeline for everything else. Technicians export raw feeds from the Best Buy facade and pole cameras, then align them by shared events, headlight sweeps, a door edge crossing a painted line, a cart return shadow, to produce a composite clock that doesn't rely on guesswork. The state then creates demonstratives, short, unedited segments before, during, after, each with a visible timestamp and a locator inset of the parking grid. Defense receives the same material plus the raw files to test frame rates, drift, or compression artifacts. No narration is needed. Seconds speak. Physical mapping follows. The casing diagram is redrawn at presentation scale with coordinates that match the lot's painted geometry and light pole bases. A companion board shows the victim's final positions and the angle of each open door relative to its hinge stop. Investigators resist over-explanation. The point is to let placement and angles show whether movement looks like retreat or approach. In towns like Augusta, murders interrupt ordinary spaces. The best antidote is a layout the jury can understand in one glance. Medical work product is staged next. The medical examiner's preliminary range indicators, contact, near contact, or intermediate, are summarized in neutral language. Any projectile or fragment secured is tracked through the state lab with separate custody forms. If a firearm is in evidence, test fire results and basic class characteristics are reserved for a clean, technical presentation. Where the law requires it, the state flags expert qualifications early so there are no surprises at hearings. Witness handling is tuned to avoid contamination. Each witness is anchored to a vantage point documented on the grid. Interview summaries note what could and could not be seen from that spot given vehicle height and light reflection. Counsel on both sides get the same maps, so cross-examination drills into sightlines, not memory performance. The data aligned cleanly. That can be a strength and a trap. When evidence lines up perfectly, the job is to prove it's because the event was that clear, not because the presentation polished away uncertainty. On the court calendar, first appearance sets bond posture. Violent felony homicides in Georgia typically draw tight conditions or no bond, subject to judicial ruling. Motions then start to queue, to preserve additional video from nearby businesses, to admit synchronized clips, to limit cumulative exhibits, or to compel production of device metadata that brackets the exchange window. The child's welfare track remains sealed and separate through DFCS. Criminal filings reference presence and timing only. This stage is rarely dramatic, but it decides how a jury will process what happened in the lot. A good file lets jurors build the event themselves, where the cars stopped, who stood where, how the seconds fell, and whether a claimed defensive retreat fits those facts. If you care about true crime as civic literacy, this is the part to study. Trials are performance. Discovery is proof. By the time the tape came down, the work had shifted from pavement to process. The file was already built to carry itself. Synchronized seconds from the Best Buy facade and pole cameras, a clean placement grid, range notes that would be finalized in the medical report. Nothing here needs decoration. It needs accuracy and a close that matches the record. This case never left the lot. Augusta, Georgia. Sunday, September 7, 2025. Around 6:12 p.m., multiple 911 calls reported gunfire at the Best Buy parking rows on Walton Way Extension. First responders removed a young child from the scene and secured the area. At 6:47 p.m., Melissa Cui Domingo, 41, and Elizabeth Cui Domingo, 74, were pronounced deceased at the location. In the hours that followed, after medical clearance and identification procedures, Hajir Talibzadeh was taken into custody and booked on 2 counts of murder and 1 count of first-degree cruelty to children. The charging posture rests on the same elements you've heard: second-marked video, casing distribution, door and stance measurements, and vantage-tested witness statements. As of September 24, 2025, the matter is on a pre-trial track. The defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. Communities adjust after a homicide in a public place. Families who rely on custody exchanges trimmed risk where they could. Police station lots, shorter windows, a third adult present. Advocates repeated practical steps without blaming victims: document timing, keep the path visible, decide exit routes in advance. These are small, unglamorous corrections. They add up. There is a human truth we can state without speculation. Melissa and Elizabeth used the structure available to them: light, cameras, a second adult, a brief handoff. The routine held until the moment it didn't. Honoring them means strengthening the structures we ask families to trust and insisting the evidence be clear enough that a jury, if there is one, can see the minutes for themselves. As I close this case, here's what I carry forward. Public places lower risk. They don't erase it. Plan exchanges, short windows, clear sightlines, a second adult, and a ready exit. Document the minutes that matter. Justice is a process. We honor Melissa and Elizabeth by demanding evidence and protecting the living. What would you change where you live? Location, timing, or team? Tell me your take and where you're watching from. If this hit or if it missed, say why. Share this with someone who needs a plan. And if you want more clear, human, true crime, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next.